Michael Jackson was only 17, but he already lived a life that felt much bigger than his age. He had been performing since childhood, traveling from city to city, stage to stage, learning how to hold an audience with his smile, his voice, and the rhythm in his feet. Even when he was young, people said he looked like he was born for the spotlight. At 17, he understood the meaning of hard work better than most adults. Every show, every rehearsal, every moment on stage had shaped him into someone the world could not ignore. But even with all his success, Michael still felt something missing. It wasn't a trophy or a bigger audience. It was something harder to describe. Almost like the feeling that somewhere out there, someone else existed who carried the same kind of spark, the same level of hunger, the same destiny to change music. Michael didn't know who that person was, or if he even truly existed, but the thought stayed with him. It pushed him. It kept him practicing long after others went home. In another part of the country, another 17-year-old was living a very different but equally intense life. Prince was quiet, thoughtful, and deeply passionate about music. He didn't speak much, not because he had nothing to say, but because he was always thinking, always listening to the sounds around him. He taught himself instruments the way some kids learned games. If he touched a piano, he figured out how to make it sing. If he picked up a guitar, he stayed with it until the strings felt like an extension of his hands. Prince didn't grow up with the same level of spotlight that followed Michael, but he didn't need it. He carried his confidence in a quieter, more private way. He believed in his talent, in the songs he created, and in the way he could express emotions through sound. While Michael danced across stages, Prince experimented in small studios and bedrooms, building his own world one melody at a time. Even though they lived different lives, people around them started whispering similar things. "Have you heard about that new kid? He's doing things no one else his age can do. He might be a prodigy." Both boys heard these words, and both reacted differently. Michael smiled politely and thanked people, but inside he always felt the urge to push further, to improve, to make his family proud. Prince listened to the praise silently, but inside he carried a fierce determination. He wanted to shape music his own way, without being compared to anyone. They had never met. They had never spoken. They had never stood in the same room. And yet, without knowing it, they were already connected by something bigger than either of them understood. It was not friendship, and it was not rivalry. It was the quiet pull of destiny, the invisible thread that sometimes ties great talents together long before the world sees them side by side. Michael's days were filled with movement. He rehearsed dance steps with a level of care that made even experienced dancers pause. He listened to music with a level of emotion that made producers lean forward, studying him. He carried the weight of being the young star of a well-known group, but he carried it with grace. His brothers teased him sometimes, telling him he was too serious for his age, but Michael couldn't help it. Music was his heart, and he treated it with the respect it deserved. Prince's days were different. He practiced alone for hours, sometimes forgetting to eat because he was so lost in the sound of a chord or a melody. His friends didn't always understand his devotion. They wondered how someone his age could spend so much time with instruments instead of people. But Prince didn't mind. He found comfort in music. It was the one place where he could be completely himself. When he played, the world faded away, leaving only passion and possibility. People who knew Michael said he seemed to shine without trying. People who knew Prince said he seemed to glow from the inside. Even though their styles were different, their dedication was the same. At 17, most teenagers are still searching for who they want to become. But Michael and Prince already felt something bigger calling them, not fame, but purpose. There were moments when Michael wondered who else might be out there, someone just as driven, someone who took music as seriously as he did. He imagined meeting someone like that someday, maybe on a stage, maybe in a studio. He didn't know if he would enjoy that meeting or if it would push him in a new direction, but he secretly wished for it. He wanted a challenge, not because he wanted to win, but because he wanted to grow. Prince, in his own world, thought similar thoughts. He had never met another teenager who understood the kind of pressure he felt. Not pressure from others, but pressure from within. He expected a lot from himself. Sometimes he wondered if he worked too hard, if he expected too much. But then he would touch a keyboard or strum a guitar and everything made sense again. He knew he wasn't meant for an ordinary path. Rumors started traveling through small music circles, quiet comments from producers, managers, and musicians. It was said there were two young geniuses rising at the same time in America. One was smooth, polished, and full of rhythm. The other was intense, gifted, and unpredictable. These whispers were never meant to compare them, but in artistic worlds, comparisons are difficult to avoid. Michael heard that a young musician from Minneapolis was making waves. Prince heard that a young performer from Los Angeles was already captivating audiences. Neither knew names at first, neither knew details, but both felt something shift inside when they heard the rumors. A spark, a curiosity, a sense that they were not the only one trying to change the world with music. At 17, both young men stood on opposite sides of the country, yet they were walking toward the same future without knowing it. Their talents were like two bright lights rising in the same sky, moving independently but destined to cross paths. They didn't know when, they didn't know how, and they didn't know what would happen when it did. But life was quietly setting the stage. Both teenagers were preparing for something much bigger than they could imagine. Michael didn't know that one day he would be known as one of the greatest performers in history. Prince didn't know that one day his music would shape entire generations. All they knew was that music lived inside them, and they were ready to follow wherever it led. Neither of them imagined that soon, very soon, they would find themselves in the same small venue, breathing the same backstage air, feeling the spark of recognition when eyes met for the first time. At 17, they were still boys in many ways, but their futures were already forming quietly behind them, ready to step into the light. This was the beginning, not of fame, but of destiny. And neither of them had any idea that one night, one stage, and one silent moment would create a connection that music fans would talk about for decades. The night that would quietly bring Michael Jackson and Prince into the same room did not look special from the outside. It was just a local music showcase in Minneapolis, held in a modest auditorium that usually hosted school plays and weekend events. There were no bright banners, no huge cameras, no reporters searching for stories. It was the kind of event where unknown singers, small local bands, and young performers tried to catch the attention of a few music scouts. To most people, it was just another Saturday night show, but for Destiny, it was the moment two young stars would step closer to each other for the first time. Michael arrived earlier than expected. He liked arriving early because it gave him time to understand a place before stepping on stage. He walked into the backstage area with a gentle smile, greeting the staff politely. Most people recognized him immediately. After all, he was already a familiar face from his years with the Jackson 5. But he carried himself without pride. He simply thanked people, shook hands, and quietly found a corner where he could warm up his voice. The backstage area was small, with cables on the floor and the scent of fresh paint from the old walls. Performers moved around with nervous excitement. Some whispered when they saw Michael, surprised that someone so famous was part of the lineup. But Michael didn't pay much attention to their reactions. He was focused on his performance. Even at 17, he treated every stage, big or small, with the same respect. While Michael was preparing, Prince entered from a back door few people noticed. He was alone, carrying his guitar in a simple case, wearing clothes that were stylish but not flashy. Prince always moved with quiet confidence. Even when no one was watching, he walked as though he knew where he was going. He kept his head slightly lowered. Not because he was shy, but because he liked observing from behind his curls. Unlike Michael, hardly anyone recognized Prince. He didn't have albums on the radio yet, and he hadn't been in front of big crowds. But the few people who had heard him play whispered excitedly to each other. They spoke about the teenage musician who could play multiple instruments better than adults. They mentioned his unusual talent, his unique voice, and his ability to blend sounds in ways others his age rarely attempted. Prince didn't react to the whispers. He simply nodded at the stage manager, found an empty chair, and began quietly tuning his guitar. His fingers moved gracefully over the strings, producing soft notes that floated through the room like warm air. Even those who weren't paying attention suddenly looked up, sensing something different in the boy sitting alone. It wasn't long before Michael noticed the sound. He turned his head slightly, not wanting to stare. The notes were clean, expressive, almost emotional. They came from someone who wasn't just playing an instrument but speaking through it. Michael felt a small flutter inside, curiosity mixed with admiration. Prince sensed someone watching him. He looked up briefly, and for half a second his eyes met Michael's. There was no smile, no nod, no greeting. Only a brief, careful observation. Michael didn't look away immediately. Something about the quiet teenager with the guitar pulled his attention. He had seen many young musicians in his life, but very few carried themselves with such focus. Prince seemed lost in his own world, yet completely aware of everything around him. The stage manager soon gathered the performers together to explain the schedule. He announced who would perform first and how long each set would be. When he mentioned that Michael Jackson was opening the night, there were murmurs of excitement. Michael nodded politely and stepped forward. Prince didn't react outwardly, but inside he felt something shift. He had heard the name before, of course. Everyone had. But hearing it in the same lineup as his own felt unusual. He wasn't intimidated, but he was curious. Who was Michael Jackson in person? What made people speak about him the way they did? As the show prepared to begin, the backstage atmosphere changed. Performers grew quiet, adjusting their clothes, rehearsing lines in their heads, and taking slow breaths to steady themselves. Michael stood near the curtain, lightly stretching his legs, humming gently to warm his voice. His expression was calm but determined. He knew people expected a lot from him, and he wanted to deliver, not for fame, but because he respected the craft. Prince stayed seated, gently sliding his fingers along the guitar neck, checking every detail. He didn't worry about the audience. His mind was focused on feeling the music as deeply as he always did. He didn't try to outshine anyone, yet his natural presence already drew silent attention. The room filled with quiet tension, the good kind, the kind that comes before something new, something unexpected. Michael stepped on stage as the lights dimmed. The crowd applauded instantly, thrilled to see him. He took a moment to breathe in the atmosphere, then he began to sing. His voice was smooth and clear, reaching every corner of the room. His movements were natural, flowing like water. Every step, every turn, every gesture showed years of experience shaped by love for performance. Backstage, Prince watched closely. He didn't blink much. He studied how Michael held the microphone, how he connected with the audience, how he used the stage like it belonged to him. Prince didn't watch with envy. He watched with interest, with the sharp attention of someone who understood talent when he saw it. Michael, while performing, caught a glimpse of Prince standing near the backstage curtain, the quiet teenager with the guitar. Their eyes met again for a brief moment. Michael didn't know why, but something about the look made him want to perform even better. It wasn't competition, it was inspiration. Prince stood still, but his presence felt like a silent question. What can you do? Show me. Michael finished his set with a graceful bow. The audience cheered loudly, clapping with excitement. Backstage, performers whispered about how polished and confident he was, but Michael didn't stay to bask in compliments. He stepped aside, breathing softly, letting the moment settle. Prince stood up, guitar in hand. His turn was next. He walked toward the stage slowly, not nervous, just thoughtful. As he passed Michael, the two stood only a few feet apart. They did not speak. They simply shared a brief look filled with curiosity and quiet recognition. Michael stepped aside to watch. Prince stepped forward into the light. The world didn't know it yet, but something important had just begun. Two teenage prodigies in the same room for the first time, unknowingly stepping into the start of a story that would follow them for the rest of their lives. Prince stepped onto the stage with a calmness that didn't match his age. He didn't rush, didn't smile nervously, and didn't try to charm the audience with words. He simply walked to the center, guitar in hand, and stood there for a moment as the light settled around him. The room grew quiet, not because anyone asked for silence, but because something in his stillness demanded attention. Even people who had been talking softly felt themselves pause, as though they sensed that something unusual was about to happen. Michael watched from the side, still catching his breath from his performance. He expected Prince to play well. After all, the whispers backstage had said he was talented. But Michael didn't expect the feeling that came next. Prince lifted his guitar, placed his fingers gently on the strings, and played a single note. Just one. It rang through the room like a small spark, sharp and clean, yet warm at the same time. It wasn't loud. It didn't try to show off. But there was something special in it, something that made the audience lean forward without even realizing they had moved. Michael felt that note ripple through him. It surprised him how much emotion could come from one simple sound. Prince hadn't even begun the song yet, and already he had shifted the atmosphere of the entire auditorium. Michael's eyes widened slightly. He had never heard a teenager play with such feeling. There was something deeply personal in the way Prince touched the strings, as if he wasn't playing for the crowd. He was playing for himself, and the audience was simply allowed to listen. Prince closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound fade before lifting his hands again. Then he began to play. His fingers moved quickly but smoothly, flowing across the wooden surface with quiet skill. The melody he created was rich and expressive. It felt like a story without words, a story that rose, dipped, and shimmered like a whisper of emotion. Unlike Michael's performance, which was full of energy and movement, Prince stood almost completely still. His expression barely changed, but every note spoke for him. It was as though he had found a way to turn feelings into sound, feelings that many people experience but don't know how to express. The audience didn't know the real meaning behind the melody, but they felt something meaningful inside them as they listened. Michael found himself mesmerized. He usually understood music quickly, but Prince's style was different from anything he had seen. It wasn't polished like Michael's, and it wasn't joyful like many young performers. It was deeper. It had layers. It felt like someone reaching inside himself and showing the world what lived there. Prince sang after a moment, and his voice blended with the guitar beautifully. His voice was soft, with a slightly breathy tone, but full of emotion. Even though the lyrics weren't loud or dramatic, every word carried sincerity. The room stayed silent, absorbing each syllable. People who had come to support other performers found themselves forgetting about the rest of the lineup. They were drawn into the moment, connected to the music in a way that didn't feel forced. Michael watched more closely than anyone. He noticed the small things, how Prince tapped his foot lightly to keep the rhythm, how he tilted his head when hitting a certain chord, how he let the guitar guide his voice instead of the other way around. Michael admired performers who were true to themselves, and there was no doubt that Prince was exactly that. He didn't copy anyone. He didn't try to sound like someone else. He didn't follow trends. He followed what he felt inside. For the first time in a long time, Michael felt something he hadn't expected to feel that night. Inspired. He wasn't inspired to compete or outdo Prince. That wasn't Michael's nature. Instead, he felt inspired to grow, to stretch himself creatively, to explore new sounds and emotions. He understood instantly that Prince was not just talented, he was special, unique, one of a kind. And meeting someone like that, someone who pushed him simply by being himself, felt strange but exciting. As Prince continued his performance, Michael noticed the audience reacting differently than they had with him. With Michael, the crowd had cheered, clapped, and smiled widely because he filled them with joy. With Prince, the room became still, almost thoughtful, as if they were all quietly listening to a secret. Michael realized that this contrast didn't divide them as performers. It highlighted how rare it was to have two young artists with such powerful but very different gifts in the same place at the same time. Prince ended his song the same way he had started, with a single note. He held it gently, letting it fade naturally. When the note disappeared into silence, he lowered his guitar and looked at the audience. He didn't bow dramatically or raise his hands. He simply nodded once, calm and respectful. For a second, the room was completely quiet. Then the applause came, rising slowly at first, as people came out of their emotional pause. Soon the clapping grew louder and more energetic. Some people stood, realizing they had witnessed something rare. Prince looked slightly surprised at the standing applause, but didn't show much emotion. He just gave another small nod and stepped off the stage. As he walked back toward the backstage area, he passed Michael again. This time, their eyes met more directly. Neither spoke, but something meaningful passed between them. A quiet understanding, a recognition of equal talent, a spark that said, without words, "I see you." Prince stopped for a second, not long enough to speak, but long enough for Michael to feel the weight of the moment. Then Prince walked past him, putting his guitar back into its case. Michael remained still, watching him with a thoughtful expression. He felt as though he had witnessed the beginning of something he couldn't yet describe. Prince didn't seem aware of the impact he had made, and maybe that was why the moment felt so honest. Throughout the rest of the night, the other performers did their best, but the room felt changed. People had seen two different kinds of brilliance: Michael's radiant energy and Prince's emotional depth, and they didn't forget either one. Even the music scouts who had come for casual evaluations whispered to each other with interest. They noticed the rare chemistry that had flowed silently between the two young prodigies. It was the kind of artistic electricity that couldn't be planned or staged. Backstage, Michael took a seat for a moment, thinking deeply. The night had not gone the way he expected. He had thought he would perform, smile, bow, and go home feeling satisfied. Instead, he found his mind filled with questions and possibilities. Meeting someone like Prince made him reflect on his own journey. He felt grateful for the spark of creativity the encounter awakened. Prince, sitting across the room tuning his guitar absent-mindedly, felt something too. He didn't show it, but he sensed that Michael had understood him in a way few people did. It wasn't friendship yet, and it wasn't rivalry. It was something more mysterious, an invisible connection between two artists who could sense each other's potential even without speaking. Neither of them could have guessed how much this quiet moment would mean in the future. They were just teenagers, after all. But destiny has a way of showing itself in the smallest, simplest ways, and that night, destiny played its first note between Michael Jackson and Prince, a note that neither of them would forget. When Prince left the stage and the applause finally began to fade, the atmosphere in the small auditorium changed in a way that no one could quite describe. It wasn't only excitement or admiration. It felt more like the entire room understood that they had just witnessed something rare, something that did not happen on ordinary nights. People kept glancing toward the backstage area, wondering what the young guitarist was doing now and whether he knew how deeply he had moved everyone. Meanwhile, Michael, who had performed earlier, was standing quietly near the side curtain, still absorbing everything he had just seen. Michael had been around talented performers all his life, but it had been a long time since he had watched someone his own age create such a strong effect with so little effort. Prince didn't need fancy clothes, big lights, or a long introduction. His presence, his voice, and the way his fingers moved on the guitar were enough to pull everyone into his world. Michael kept thinking about the single note that Prince began with, the way it had cut through the room and taken hold of the audience without force. It was pure, honest, and unforgettable. As the next performer tried to begin their act, the crowd clapped politely, but their attention wasn't fully present. They were still thinking about what they had just witnessed. Many performers backstage whispered quietly to each other, saying how strange and amazing it was that two 17-year-olds had filled the room with such powerful energy without saying a single word to each other. Michael stayed near the curtain for a while, replaying Prince's performance in his mind. He wondered if Prince had planned every little detail, the simplicity, the stillness, the quiet intensity, or if it came naturally to him. Michael could tell just by watching that Prince was someone who didn't pretend or hide behind anything. He expressed himself through sound, and that honesty reached people easily. Prince, on the other hand, didn't seem aware of how big the moment was. After returning backstage, he quietly placed his guitar in its case, closed the latches carefully, and sat down on a folding chair. His expression was calm, almost thoughtful, as if he was reviewing his own performance in his head. He wasn't looking for applause or validation. He was simply thinking about the music, the feeling, and the message he had tried to share. Michael slowly walked toward him, not to speak, but because the room was small and the energy naturally pulled them closer. They didn't stand too close and didn't stare for long. It was just enough for Michael to observe Prince's calm behavior up close and feel inspired again by how genuine he seemed. At one point, Prince lifted his eyes and glanced at Michael. The look wasn't sharp or challenging. It was more like a quiet acknowledgement, an understanding that they were both aware of what had just happened on stage. There was a sense of respect in that look, a silent recognition between two young artists who understood the weight of each other's talent. But even in that moment, neither tried to speak. Words didn't feel necessary. The event continued, but the emotional peak of the night had already passed. Every performer after them did their best, but the audience had already found the two performances they would remember long after the lights dimmed. Michael's energy and warmth had filled the room early on, and Prince's depth and emotion had left a lasting impression afterward. Together, unwittingly, they had created a rhythm, a balance, a conversation without speaking. As the final act finished and the event wrapped up, the crowd slowly filtered out, talking excitedly about the two young talents. Some wondered if they would perform together someday. Others wondered if they knew each other. A few even whispered that the music world had no idea what was coming, having two gifted teenagers rising at the same time. Backstage, staff members and performers congratulated both Michael and Prince at different moments. Michael accepted the compliments with his familiar gentle smile. Prince nodded politely, grateful but quiet, just as he always was. Even though many people tried to ask him questions about his style, he answered only briefly before returning to his thoughts. Eventually, the crowd thinned and the noise died down. The stage lights dimmed and backstage became quieter. Only a few people remained, gathering equipment and closing cases. Michael stood near the exit with one of his brothers who had come to support him. His brother chatted happily about how well Michael had performed, but Michael kept glancing around the room, hoping to catch one more glimpse of Prince before leaving. Prince was still there, packing his things slowly and thoughtfully. He didn't rush to leave, but he didn't linger either. He moved with the same calmness he had shown on stage, as if each task had meaning. Michael felt a pull to say something, even just a simple, "You were great." But he hesitated. Not because he felt shy, Michael was usually kind and open with others, but because it felt like speaking might break the quiet magic of the night. The silence between them had said enough. Prince finished packing and gave one last look around the backstage area. As he turned toward the exit, he passed by Michael again. They were only a few steps apart. This time, they didn't break eye contact right away. Prince gave a small, almost invisible nod, a gesture that carried more meaning than a long conversation. Michael responded with a soft smile, warm and sincere. Nothing more needed to be said. Prince walked out first, stepping into the cool night air. Michael watched him leave, the faint sound of the guitar case handle clicking gently as Prince disappeared through the door. For a moment, the hallway felt quiet and meaningful, like the end of a chapter, or perhaps the start of one. Michael stepped outside a few minutes later. The night sky over Minneapolis was calm, with soft lights glowing from distant buildings. Michael inhaled deeply, taking in the fresh night air. His heart felt full, but not in a heavy way. It felt full in a way that artists feel when something important touches them. He remembered how Prince had played that one note at the beginning of his performance, how it had settled into the room like a spark, how it had stirred something inside him. Michael smiled to himself. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. Meeting Prince tonight, seeing the talent, the heart, and the quiet dedication, had awakened a deeper spark in him. Some encounters shape people immediately. Some take time. But Michael knew deep inside that tonight would stay with him for years. He didn't know when or how, but he sensed their paths would cross again. He sensed that this quiet, wordless connection would grow into something larger than either of them could imagine at 17. Prince walked down the street toward home, unaware that Michael was thinking about him. He wasn't thinking about the applause or the reactions. He was thinking about the way Michael had watched him with interest and respect. It wasn't common for Prince to feel understood by others, but tonight he felt something close to understanding, even if it came from a distance. Neither knew it yet, but on a small stage in a simple auditorium with no cameras or reporters watching, history had quietly taken its first step. The night air outside the small Minneapolis auditorium felt different after the showcase ended. It was peaceful and cool, yet filled with a quiet sense of possibility. People who had attended the event walked to their cars still talking about what they had seen, repeating the same two names again and again without realizing how meaningful this night truly was. Michael Jackson and Prince, two young musicians who had unknowingly shared a moment that would follow them for the rest of their lives. Michael stood with his hands in his pockets as his brother spoke beside him, but his mind was somewhere else. He kept replaying the night inside his head like scenes from a short film. He saw Prince walking onto the stage. He heard that soft first note that captured everyone. He remembered the feeling that moved through the room, the calm, deep silence that Prince created without saying anything at all. Michael didn't know why the moment felt so important, but it settled into him like something precious. He had performed hundreds of times in large venues and small ones, yet tonight felt different. Tonight felt like the beginning of something invisible but meaningful. A shift. A new color inside his artistic world. He had inspired many people in his life, but tonight, he felt inspired deeply by someone else. Prince, meanwhile, walked down the sidewalk with his guitar case in hand. He was quiet, thinking about the night the same way Michael did, though his thoughts came in simple reflections. He didn't think about fame or competition. He thought about the feeling of playing in front of someone who truly listened, someone who understood without needing explanations. Michael's expression during the performance had stayed in Prince's mind. That look wasn't casual, it was focused, thoughtful, and warm. Prince sensed a rare connection, the kind artists feel when they recognize passion in another person. At 17, neither boy knew how to explain what had happened between them because it wasn't something that could be described easily. They hadn't exchanged more than a few glances. They hadn't spoken a single word to each other. Yet there was an energy, a silent understanding that only artists who share the same world can feel. The next morning, Michael woke up earlier than usual. He sat on the edge of his hotel bed, rubbing his eyes, feeling strangely excited for reasons he couldn't fully describe. He thought about practicing new songs, exploring new ideas, trying new sounds that he had never considered before. Prince's performance had opened something inside him, a door he didn't even know existed. It wasn't a door to rivalry, it was a door to creativity. Michael hummed softly as he began stretching his voice. His brother, still half asleep, asked why he was practicing so early. Michael just laughed gently and said he felt inspired. He didn't mention Prince's name out loud, but the memory of that quiet guitarist sat comfortably in his mind like a reminder of what true passion could do. Prince, waking up in his small room at home, placed his guitar across his lap and began playing slow, thoughtful notes. He didn't try to write a new song. He didn't try to perform something big. He simply played what he felt, letting his emotions guide his fingers. The memory of the crowd, the applause, and Michael's attentive gaze filled him with a sense of warmth. Prince rarely smiled fully, but that morning he allowed himself a small smile, soft and barely visible, as he realized that last night had touched him more than he expected. In the days that followed, both young men continued their lives, traveling, rehearsing, performing, and dreaming. Yet the memory of that night stayed close. It didn't fade. It became a quiet flame that pushed them forward. Sometimes the biggest changes in people begin with small moments, a single look, a single note, or a single performance that touches the soul. As months passed, they didn't cross paths again immediately. Their worlds were growing in different directions. Michael's schedule became busier, filled with recording sessions and interviews. Fans grew, crowds cheered, and slowly, he began stepping out of the shadow of his childhood career and into a new identity of his own. Each time he walked into a studio, he carried the memory of that single note Prince had played. It reminded him to be honest, to be brave, to express himself without fear. Prince, too, found his path shifting. He continued experimenting with sounds, writing songs late at night, learning new instruments just because he wanted to understand them. He didn't rush to be famous. He wanted to build something that was truly his, unique, sincere, and unforgettable. When he created melodies that felt different from anything he had made before, he often thought back to that night and the way Michael had watched him so closely. It made him believe even more deeply in his talent. They had shared only glances, but those glances had said more than many long conversations could. They had both felt seen, not as young performers, but as true artists. It was a rare gift, something they didn't take lightly, even if they never talked about it out loud. Years later, as they rose higher in their careers, people would often speak about them as if they were destined to be compared. They would talk about their differences, their unique strengths, their styles, and their impact on the world. But none of those discussions included the quiet truth that before fame built its walls between them, they were simply two 17-year-old boys sharing a stage, discovering that someone else in the world understood their hearts without needing words. Many legendary stories begin with loud moments, grand scenes, or big announcements. But the story between Michael and Prince began in silence. It began in a small backstage area with soft lighting and folding chairs. It began with two teenagers noticing each other's strengths and respecting them instantly. It began with a single note that held more emotion than an entire speech. Michael rarely talked about that night publicly, but the inspiration it sparked could be felt in his later music, the emotions, the depth, the desire to keep improving. Prince didn't mention the event either, but his confidence and creativity continued to grow, shaped in part by knowing he wasn't the only young artist capable of changing the world. They both lived extraordinary lives, but the night they first stood near each other, one watching from the side of the stage, the other holding a guitar with quiet strength, remained a special piece of their story, tucked away from the public eye. Even as they stepped into global fame, that memory stayed pure, untouched by the pressures of the world. It was the beginning of their silent connection, a moment that reminded them both that greatness often recognizes greatness long before anyone else sees it. Some friendships start with conversations, some rivalries start with harsh words. But what Michael and Prince shared started with something simpler, gentler, and far more powerful. A single night, a single stage, a single note, and a silent understanding that their journeys had quietly touched each other before the world even knew their names would be linked forever. And so, history began, not with noise, but with a spark, not with competition, but with respect, not with a loud announcement, but with two 17-year-old artists standing on a small stage in Minneapolis, unaware that the moment would echo through music history for years to come.